Hello from jolly old England. Today I wanted to go over some of the things you have to think about before making an international move. Before you do this, you have to even make the decision to move. This is a life-changing experience, and I would not recommend it for everyone. Some of the things you have to think about before making a move just are where you are. You know, that whole 5 years, where you want to see yourself in 5 years, where do you want to see yourself in 2 years? Man, where do you want to see yourself in 1 year? These are the things you have to think about before making a regular move. You gotta times that by 10 before making one from the United States to anywhere else. There's so many legal requirements and things to go over. So today, let's review the top 10 things before making an international move across the globe. So the first thing you gotta think about is the visa and requirements that the government will have. Not just the United States, because the United States has plenty of requirements and things that they expect expats to still do. But the country where you're moving will also have requirements that they will want you to follow. There's all kinds of legal documents that will have to be filed. The United States requires so much out of their expats in comparison to some other countries. So that is a major thing that you'll have to consider. The next thing that you have to consider, the second one, is the cost of living. Where you live in the United States could drastically be different between where you're moving. In some countries, basic necessities are much cheaper. In some countries, it's much more expensive. Your way of living may be drastically different to the way of living that you're going to be able to afford wherever you move. The cost of living crisis that is facing the United States is not just limited to parts of the United States, it's global in many areas. The cost of gas needs to be considered not just where you're at, but also where you're going. The cost of a grocery bill. The cost of groceries when we moved here, much, much cheaper. However, the cost of energy, much higher. So where does this all play into your budget? It has to be considered. The third thing to consider is healthcare and insurance. Not just insurance for yourself, for your loved ones, but also for your cars, your valuable property. When you're moving, you have insurance on the moving van. Well, that's 10 times, when you're considering an international move, because now you have to insure your items from point A to point B over the ocean, or on a train. When making an international move, this is an important thing that you need to have figured out before you move to the location where you're going. That way once you get there, if you get sick on the plane, who do I need to call? Where do I need to go? What do I need to be able to get? The fourth thing that needs to be considered before making an international move is the custom and the culture that you're moving into. This is going to play a major part of your life on the day-to-day basis. You can't just walk outside like you would necessarily in the United States and expect everyone to react to you the same way. Making a move from the United States to the United Kingdom, there are a lot of things that are similar. There are actually a lot of things that are very different, and people can get confused and actually come off very rude if they're not careful. The last thing you want to do when making the actual move is come off rude to your future neighbors, because you don't want to have an issue with your neighbors. The fifth one we lucked out on, because making the move from the United States to the United Kingdom, we have the same language, English, mainly coming from England. So making the move to England, fairly easy. Even inside of England, you have different slangs that are spoken by people. Geordie, Cockney. These, for someone from the outside, can be, even from someone inside the country, can just be like, boom, what are you saying? The sixth one, and one making the move from the United States to the United Kingdom almost has to be solved before you get here, is jobs, careers. Going back to number one, the visa requirement from someone moving from the United States to the United Kingdom will most likely require that you already have your job or career established or going into it before you arrive. For many of the visas moving here, that is just a basic requirement, and it's on a point-based system that almost requires you to have that established. Which brings us to our 7th item, education. This has to be considered both in yourself and if you have kids or plan to have kids. The education system here is drastically different. And getting your child into that system, you got to plan ahead and you got to make sure you're ready when you get here. This is something to consider before making your move because there could be wait times and there could be delays. Because if you're having to have your son or daughter in school before you arrive, or having some sort of nursery care or something so that you can actually work, this is a big item to consider. The 8th thing to consider is housing. And this can be tricky for the best of people because in some cases, going back to 1, you have to have this figured out before you make your move. But if you're making a move to someplace like here, the United Kingdom, you have to have this figured out before step 1 or in step 1 because they're going to want to know. At the same time, you can't actually rent or buy property until you have step 1 and the actual move completed. The 9th and possibly the biggest headache you'll face is moving your actual stuff. Making the move from the United States to anywhere else in the world is going to cause issues as far as packing your stuff. You got to make sure it's packed right for the conditions it could end up in, which means when it's going overseas, you have to make sure it's well packed so that plates aren't going to break, your decorations aren't going to break, your computers aren't going to break, your monitors, things like that, TVs. And then you have to consider whether or not your TV is going to work in the place where you're going, because some places have different plugs than the United States. And you got to make sure that you can plug something in when you get here in order for it to have power. The 10th thing you need to consider before making an international move is your social support system. Making this kind of move means you're removing yourself completely from those that you're around and familiar with. And you're going into an environment where the culture can be drastically different. This is something you need to think ahead about because people will have different reactions to your lifestyle and your way of thinking. You'll want to remember to be considerate of others while also making sure that you're taking care of yourself and building these bridges that you'll eventually need to rely on. Now in the coming weeks, I'll deep dive into these categories and how we made the move from the United States to the United Kingdom and the different barriers and ups and downs that we experienced through this move. So remember to like and subscribe so you can follow our journey or learn more about making an international move.